Sin and Punishment on the Nintendo 64 is a bit of a cult classic, although it's kind of in this weird space in between where I think most Nintendo fans are well aware of it, but often it can feel kind of underappreciated, maybe due to the limited availability. It only came out in the West on Virtual Console, on the Wii and Wii U. But anyways, this game is basically an on-rail shooter by Treasure, so if you're familiar with the games like Gunstar Heroes, Mischief Makers, things like that, it's the same team behind that. And unlike, say, like a Star Fox or a Panzer Dragoon, character movement and aiming are separate. So you basically use the C buttons to move your character left and right, and then the analog stick to aim your reticule. The control scheme is pretty unconventional here, although I guess you could say that about a lot of Nintendo 64 games, and it takes a little bit of time to get used to. But it's similar to, like, say, Shinobi 3 on the Genesis, where, you know, when you are aiming at targets, you essentially will shoot at them when using the attack button, but when you're close range enough, your character will do a melee attack. There's a decent amount of depth here, though, through things like evasive maneuvers. You can, like, roll around, jump. There's also like two different firing modes, an auto one that does less damage but automatically targets things, and a manual one that does more damage but you have to be the one to particularly aim at a spot. And there's also the ability to like reflect projectiles at certain enemies, so you can like take missiles and knock them back at foes and do significantly more damage. And there's like these tricky bonus shots that they set up for you for a few seconds where you can kind of take your cursor and move it to a place that's kind of out of the way to get some additional points. This game has a score system, so you know, if you learn to master this control scheme, the game will reward you by letting you get that higher score. And outside of even just like the score, it's an incredibly hectic game where things get really busy, and the screen will just be full of bullets, and you're still expected to perform at aiming and shooting at enemies. If you're playing this for the first time, you'll probably die a lot. Although it has a good balance between like challenging the player, there's like a sense of urgency with your health, and also there's a limited number of credits, so you can run out of credits and game over if you die too much. But the game is also pretty generous. Like your life bar is not like this really fragile thing. You have a lot of health that you can kind of burn through. There's health pickups within the level themselves as well. And there's a lot of opportunities to build up credits. Basically, if you kill 100 enemies without dying, you'll get an extra credits. But you do have to work towards it a bit, so it's this good balance of making sure you're performing while not having to really, like, you know, perfect a section to be able to continue. The game also is pretty generous on the final boss fight. The boss is basically built to give you free credits throughout it. So it's not a hard game to get through, but it isn't like a free ride either. I think that's good because this is a flashy enough of like a visual showpiece for the Nintendo 64 that you really want to see all of it. There's like an easy and hard mode you can switch between as well, so if you want to lean one way or the other, you can do that. But this game is packed with cutscenes and dialogue, and it has quite a bit of voice acting actually, which feels pretty solid for the year 2000.
Good morning, Saki.
Good morning, Iron.
Come on, we've got work to do.
It's like kind of like a technical marvel for the system. It runs really well. You know, I think the game has a lot of nice detail to it, and the cutscenes are well produced overall. You're kind of fighting through this near future tech Japan. Although I think the character design is kind of like it or hate it. You know, they have quite a bit of detail to them, but they're like very angular in terms of like their body forms. They also have really wide hips for some reason. So. The only real downside to this game really is the length, and I think a lot of how you feel about that will just depend on, you know, what you're looking at for in this game. It's about an hour to 2 hours long, so it's basically like sitting down, you know, for an afternoon. If you're like expecting some well-realized world, you know, this game feels like you're just seeing a sliver of it. You're seeing this like one series of events that are happening in like a greater story. And the game itself won't really give you any details on that. But I think what is actually here in the game is well produced, and there is like a slight story thread you can follow as like Saki kind of, I don't know if it really like he discovers like some powers he has. He has like this blood in his body that allows him to like transform into a beast and things like that. But there's like a plot around that you can kind of follow. And there is like a sequel on the Wii. I don't know if that fleshes out the story, you know, significantly more or not. I haven't played it yet, although I do have a copy. The comparison I always make is it feels like a 90s anime OVA. You're clearly getting this very slim cut of what feels like this massive world with its own lore, essentially. So the version you've been seeing in this video is the Japanese Nintendo 64 release. This did get a localized release on the Wii Virtual Console, and as well as the Wii U Virtual Console. And while the 64 release runs in 240p, and I think it looks great running in 240p, honestly, it's one of the best looking 64 games I've ever seen. The Wii Virtual Console and Wii U Virtual Console versions run at 480p, although, you know, when it comes to re-releases and emulation, you know, those can have their own issues around it. I'm not privy to what challenges those games might have, although I remember the Wii Virtual Console version seeming to run and play just fine from my memory. But you might want to do a little bit of research if you're really a stickler for those kind of things. But it's really well worth the play, so no matter how you end up playing this game, you know, on the original 64, through an EverDrive, or on the Wii or Wii U VC, it's worth a play, and it's short enough that it's not really much of a time commitment. But very cool game, and probably one that I think every Nintendo 64 fan should at least sit down and play at some point, whether you buy that officially or not. Anyways, thanks for coming. OneControlPort.com is the website. If you're a fan of Sin and Punishment, I actually uploaded the manual to archive.org. I couldn't find the full manual anywhere online, so if you want to see scans for that, I'll put the link in the description. Otherwise, if you're interested in more Nintendo 64 games, I have a video review of Castlevania 64 you can take a look at. I also recently streamed Quest 64 as well, so if you want to check that out, I'll link both of those at the end of this video.